How to sprout seeds of transition. Welcome to this presentation. I'll be presenting you my research that I did into partnerships between the eco-village movement and national governmental actors for a transition to sustainability. I am Merel Mason. I did a master in international relations at the University of Amsterdam. And for my master thesis, I did a 7-month qualitative research into the question, how can partnerships between the eco-village movement and national governments be shaped to facilitate the transition to sustainability? I went to Senegal, Thailand, and Damanhur in Italy, and I did over 30 in-depth interviews with eco-villagers and local experts, as well as literature research into this question. Now, this presentation will not be a summary of my thesis, nor a summary of my findings, but I will be presenting to you a brief overview of how transitions work in theory, from a macro perspective. And from the cases of Thailand and Senegal, I'll be deriving some suggestions for the eco-village movement on how to go about partnerships with governmental actors in local transition projects. The aim of the presentation is to empower eco-villagers and GEN, the Global Eco-Village Network, with new perspective and strategic tools to help guard against pitfalls when you're partnering with mainstream actors, particularly governmental actors. Now, we'll start with the theory. This is the multi-level perspective on transitions. It's been developed by Grin, Schot, Rotmans, Geels, and Loorbach in 2010, for those who want to really know more about it and look it up. You have to bear with me the next few moments when we're talking about the theory, because I'll be introducing a lot of terms and in a very short time, and it's actually quite simple. So if you bear with me, you'll be getting it, I'm sure. So here we go. This is the depiction of transition. At the bottom here, we find the micro level. Here we find the meso level, and here we find the macro level. These are increasing structurations of activities in local practices. This sounds very complicated. It just means micro, macro, meso level of society. On the x-axis, we find time. So this is a development of society over time. Let's start with the landscape level. At the landscape level, we find long-term exogenous developments. So you can think about, for example, climate change or industrial revolution. These are developments that affect society, but that are not affected directly by individuals or groups of people. They are very large-scale and long-term developments. Now, at the meso level here, we find the regime system. Regimes are not what is usually connoted with a regime bad governance. No, what is meant here is systems of how we do things. So, for example, think about the education system. This is a regime. Think about the way we do economics, neoliberal in this case, in Europe, for example. That's a regime. And so in every realm you have a regime. So you have scientific regimes, you have cultural regimes, technological regimes, policy regimes, political regimes, industrial regimes, market regimes, etc. Together, the dominant regimes create a regime system. And we call this usually the mainstream system. And these separate regimes, they keep each other in place. They enforce one another because they're based on the same paradigm. They're based on the same fundamental ideas and concepts. So you can speak of a lock-in. The regimes are keeping each other in place. And even though dynamics are occurring within the regime system, things are changing, etc. all the time, but the fundamentals remain the same. So the regimes together are in a dynamic equilibrium. At the niche level here, you find new ideas. These new ideas at the niche level are not integrated or do not fit within the dominant regime system. That's why they are niches. But they may try to interfere with the regime or penetrate the regime to alter it. As is depicted by the many arrows that are here and the only one or two that are actually breaking through, these niche innovations usually don't make it because of the pressure coming from the regime system. that is very stable and very strong. But some do. And why do they? Because from the landscape level over here, there's an arrow going on to the regime level, and that depicts the pressure coming from the landscape development. So, for example, climate change and wide-scale pollution and deterioration of ecological services is creating pressure upon the regime to change, because the regime is causing these problems. And therefore, a window of opportunity is created for a new idea, a niche innovation, to come into the regime and change it. So that's what's depicted here. This area over here is a state of flux, is a state of change, and in which pressure is too great, a new idea comes in, and everything changes. And out here we see a new system emerge based on fundamentally different principles. That's transition. And we have a new dynamic equilibrium of a new regime system. Eventually, this regime system also feeds back into the landscape, changing the landscape developments over time. So this is the depiction over here. Landscape pressure comes onto the regime system, the dominant mainstream system of society, and creates a window of opportunity for a new idea to come in and change the regime system, creating a state of flux in which everything changes and a new regime system emerges based on fundamentally different principles. That's transition. Now, the last term that I haven't mentioned is incubator room. A niche novelty needs a protected space to mature and develop and wait until the time that the window of opportunity is there for the niche to penetrate the regime system. An incubator room is basically a protected area or a protected environment for a niche to develop, and it's created by committed people that engage with this new idea, and develop it, help develop it until it's strong enough to break through. What's important to be aware of is the difference between transition and innovation. Now, transition is the alteration of fundamental principles of a regime system. This is a result of co-evolution of developments at different levels. So landscape level comes together with regime actors, comes together with niche actors that have new ideas, and in time they come together which can create a change at all levels. The choices of those involved with people, basically the people involved with transition, are decisive in its success or demise. So it's very actor-centered, it's very people-centered, this perspective. It really matters what you do, what choices are made, and whether the transition actually happens or that it takes a suboptimal pathway and transition is not realized. Now, innovation, on the other hand, is the adaptation by the regime system without actually altering fundamental principles. So if we go back to the depiction here, that means that landscape pressure is on the regime system, but the regime system doesn't fundamentally change, it just changes a little bit, it just adapts its way of doing, but the fundamental ideas remain the same. That is when we speak of innovation. So here we come already to suggestion number 1 that I have for the Eco-Village movement. It's a strategic suggestion. It means be clear on your fundamentals as a group. What are the fundamental ideas underlying the regime you are concerned with? So the system you're concerned with changing. Is it agriculture? Is it education? Is it housing? Is it all of that? But what are the fundamental ideas underlying the regime that as it is now? And what are the fundamental ideas underlying the regime that you want to create? What are the fundamental ideas of the vision that you have for this regime? And then analyze, are you aiming for transition or innovation? Both are fine, but be clear on what your actual aim is. And is your partner aiming for transition or innovation? Now, why is this important? Because the lines between innovation and transition can be blurry. It's important to prevent you to put effort into innovating a regime and thus strengthening it, when you actually want to change its fundamentals. You don't want to strengthen a regime that's already there, you want to actually fundamentally change it. Well, in that case, it's important that you're not putting effort into the regime as it is now. You want to prevent your partner from integrating your energies in their agenda when you actually want to follow your own agenda. Because if you're not clear on the difference between transition and innovation, and the fundamental differences between your ideas and the ideas of your partner, it's very easy for your partner to, not even on purpose, but to integrate your efforts into what they actually are aiming for, which might be innovation, when you're maybe aiming for transition. So yeah, this is why it's important. Now, this suggestion will be clarified also by this case that we're going to be looking at now, which is Thailand. First, we'll be analyzing the landscape pressures that are relevant in the case of Thailand. The landscape pressures which are actually going on now in Thailand are these big environmental costs of economic development, rising social inequalities, widespread high levels of household debt, increasing vulnerability of farmers due to volatile open markets, and also climate changes, urbanizing youth, and a perceived loss of cultural heritage due to westernization. So these are the pressures that are having an effect on the regime system as it is now, and for which regime actors are trying to find solutions. So this is creating a window of opportunity for new ideas to come in. One of these new ideas is the OnThai project. It's done by the Ecovillage Transition Asia, which is cooperating with Global Ecovillage Network as well as Gaia Education. And it concerns a pilot project that's done in cooperation with the provincial government of the Chiang Mai province in the north. And it concerns an area of 11 villages with about 5,000 people living there. And ETA wants to create community structures, organic practices, better water management, new economic opportunities, and most of all, wants to change worldviews from lifestyles focused on economic gain to a more holistic focus in the spirit of the eco-village paradigm. So the window here is created by the provincial governor of Chiang Mai himself. The governor has a personal enthusiasm for the eco-village concept, and according to the ETA, is seeking new discourse that differs from the dominant sufficiency economy discourse that is widely used in Thailand now as an alternative to the mainstream neoliberal way of doing economics. Now, according to the ETA, the governor is looking for a new concept, something new to present to gain political popularity on his rivals. So now we come already to the next suggestion. Make use of political dynamics, but guard your autonomy. So popular politics, power struggles, and the seeking for prestige or new discourse of politicians, by politicians, can be a window of opportunity to get governmental support for transition projects. So make use of that gain. That's completely legitimate. A government's take on the eco-village can be seen as an innovation on the dominant regime system by the government, and that might be the reason for their interest, innovation of a regime to deal with the landscape pressures. But this also by an eco-village can be used as a window of opportunity, eventually actually leading to transition, if you are able to keep your autonomy and keep your focus. You can use a government's aim of innovation as a window of opportunity that eventually leads to transition. But it is important that you make sure to keep your autonomy and focus, because also too close engagement with volatile politics may result in internal division, alienation of the people you actually want to reach, or undermining of your aims. And this last point will be clarified more by the next case. So the next case is about the Santiasoka and the Bank of Agriculture in Thailand. The Santiasoka is the eco-Buddhist group, which were the first to create eco-villages in Thailand. The Bank of Agriculture, it's a governmental bank who asked the Santiasoka to train indebted farmers who were indebted with the bank in organic practices and moderate lifestyle so that they eventually could service their debts. Between 2000 and 2007, the Santi Soka did week-long trainings and eventually trained 300,000 indebted farmers into these practices. Again here, the window was embodied by a person, in this case called General Chamlong, which was a very popular politician who was also a follower of the Santi Soka, who happened to be a personal advisor of the Prime Minister of that time, Thaksin. Now, the close relations between the Santi Soka and General Chamlong, their close loyalty, in the long run turned out to be possibly negative, because Chamlong had to turn away from Thaksin when Thaksin became unpopular and eventually was evicted from the country. So Chamlong turned away from Thaksin. The monks openly opposed Thaksin, the Santi Soka, openly opposed Thaksin in demonstrations and in the media. And they therefore ran the risk of alienating the poor farmers, which were followers of Thaksin, but which were also the people that the Santi Soka tried to reach. So they were actually undermining their own aims by their outspoken political color. That's why I said in the second suggestion, make sure to keep your autonomy in focus. And too close engagement with volatile politics may result in alienation of your constituency, of the people that you want to reach, and undermining your aims. Now back to the case itself. So Santi Soka trained 300,000 indebted farmers. However, 95% of the farmers returned to conventional practices, at least in the northern provinces, which is where the only research into the long-term benefits of this training has been done. The reasons why these farmers returned to conventional practices, why these trainings failed, is because of private debts that these farmers also had, in addition to the bank debts that they had. And because they had these private debts, the risk of changing to a new way of doing things was too high, because maybe it won't work at once, and maybe you cannot service your debts if you try this new thing. So they went back to the way that they knew how to do things. In addition, there's nearly no consumer awareness in Thailand of the benefits of organic foods. So there are nearly no market opportunities for organic foods. There is no way of getting a higher price for the higher quality that your product is, or the higher input you have to put into organic production. So there was no market opportunity. Also, in general, the government supports conventional farming on a really big scale. They're subsidizing agro industry, and they are importing pesticides and inorganic manure, and it's really easy to get these things. So to access conventional ways of doing agriculture is very easy, whereas changing to organics is very hard. So basically there was no systemic approach to this training. The training was just given, and they were just hoping that people would just change. But on the other levels, there was no change. So there was a lack of systemic approach. That's why we come to suggestion number 3 and 4. The first one is a systemic approach can be vital for a successful transition. And in this case, a governmental partner, if you have a governmental partner, they have access to other regime players. So they have access to businesses, other ministries, other governmental actors to be involved in the transition project. So take a helicopter view and create multi-stakeholder partnerships. In this way, you can create co-evolution of different levels coming together in one situation and changing the situation from different sides at the same time. That's how you create transition. If you remember the definition of transition, co-evolution is crucial. Now, the second suggestion is mitigate risks of transition. So in the case of the farmers, we saw that the risks of transition were too high for them. So in this case, a temporary backup scheme for the risk takers, the farmers, during the transition period, for example, 2 or 3 years, may have lowered barriers for them to actually transition to organics. So you could have given them a guarantee of income for a certain period of time, so that they are safe, so that they can service their debts and they can get their children to school and they can eat. So now we move on to Senegal. We go about it in the same way as Thailand, first analyzing the landscape pressures that are relevant for this case in Senegal. Now, in Senegal, we see that the macroeconomic strategy does not pay off. Over the last few decades, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, has invested or loaned a lot of money to the development of the country, but this has not actually translated into better livelihoods or higher livelihoods of the people. Actually, their life circumstances have deteriorated over the last period of time. Further, there's a high vulnerability of the economy to volatile food prices, international food prices. They export nearly everything they produce, they import nearly everything they eat, and therefore they're very vulnerable to the international food market. They're losing land to climate changes. Desertification is a really big problem in Senegal. There's a poverty deforestation cycle where more poverty creates more cutting of trees, and more cutting of trees creates more poverty. There's a loss of cultural heritage and ancient knowledge on how to farm the land, on how to use medicine, on how to do things. And youth is urbanizing to the cities and not finding jobs. So there's high unemployment in the cities. These are the pressures that are on the regime system, which the regime system is trying to find ways to cope with. And that creates a window of opportunities for new ideas to come in. So we looked here at the case of Jensen and ANEF. Jensen is the branch of the Global Ecovillage Network, Senegal. It was created in 2002 officially. And ANEF is the national agency for ecovillages that was created by the government in 2008 on the initiation of the president of that time, Wade, and apparently his wife was most influential in this case. So the differences between the approach, between the actual movement, the ecovillage movement, Jensen, and the agency, ANEF, the governmental actor, are these. Jensen is a fragmented network of many NGOs trying to create something together, but all working in their own corners. ANEF is very homogeneous, but it has nearly no practical collaboration on the ground with the Jensen. Jensen has about 50 villages, but there might be more now because this is data from mid-2013. And back then there were already many villages applying to be part of Jensen also. ANEF has about 20 villages, which are pilot projects in which they have experimented with their eco-village transition strategy over the last 3 years. Their aim is to eventually transition 14,000 villages, which is half of the Senegalese villages. Jensen has nearly no funds, whereas ANEF has more than 60 million euros of funds to realize their transition of 14,000 villages. Jensen, in its approach, has a very big emphasis on worldview or cultural heritage. They look at the eco-village transition as starting with reminding people of how they used to live, of how their villages used to all be eco-villages only one generation ago, and how they used to do that. So they believe it starts with worldview, and from that sustainability emerges, and a holistic integration into the environment emerges. ANEF, on the other hand, has a bigger emphasis on material sustainability. They start with creating materials. They also have the funds, so they start with solar panels and economic structures and water management and creating gardens. They start with material sustainability, and worldview does not have a very pronounced place in their strategy. Jensen is very much focused on a DIY, do-it-yourself approach. They come into a village and say, well, you're going to have to do it yourself, and we're going to help you. But ANEF is much more into an engagement approach. So they bring an official from the government there to manage everything, and the people are engaged with the development, but not doing it themselves so much as Jensen. And one difference, which is very much related to your next suggestion, is that Jensen has different unformalized transition strategies because they are a fragmented network of many NGOs, many people doing their things and having slightly different ideas on how to do it practically. So they have unformalized transition strategies. The ANAF, on the other hand, has a very concrete plan of action. They're just having a few steps saying, first you do this, second you do that, third you go there, etc. It's very concrete. Now the window is not very relevant for our next suggestion, so we'll just go through it really quickly. The window is created by political popularity of the low carbon footprint discourse. The government is seeking new development strategies for achieving the Millennium Development Goals, and President Wada has introduced the term Ecovillage and got UNDP funding for it, and therefore they could create the agency. So the government's involvement with Ecovillage development has raised some concerns within Jensen, within the Ecovillage movement in Senegal, and the concerns are basically threefold. They're afraid that the government takes the Ecovillage concept and redefines it, so it will leave out the crucial worldview element, and which, according to the Ecovillage movement, there is the basis for an eco-village rather than the result. And secondly, the eco-village, they're afraid that the eco-village term will be connoted with governmental financial investment, and there's no more interest from locals for the Jensen approach, which is very much DIY and does not involve large funds. And finally, some people in the eco-village movement in Senegal witnessed there's a chance of division within the movement due to competition for influence within the agency. So people within the Jensen movement are competing for influence. Now, Jensen is already proactively engaging itself in talks with the agency on eco-village development, and they were successfully strengthening ties, and they're optimistic about its increasing say in the agency's approach. So they're already trying to engage themselves to deal with these concerns that they have. Now, we go to the last and final suggestion. Guard for your partner's attempt to redefine your concepts to fit dominant regimes, which would be innovation, which might be what the government of Senegal is trying to do. Some ways of doing this is to match and go beyond the level of concreteness of your partner. So we saw that ANAF is a very concrete plan of how to do a transition to an eco-village, whereas that of the Jensen is not as clear and not as unified. So match or go beyond the level of concreteness of your partner. Second, speed is your ally. Be first in presenting a plan of action. Take your partner by the hand. And when you're not able to be first, as in the case of Senegal was, make your way to the design table and impress with concrete examples and strategies, which is what the Senegalese movement is doing now. They're trying to make their way to the design table and influence decisions on how to go about the transition of traditional villages to an eco-village. All right, so this is our overview of the suggestions that we went through. Suggestion number 1, be clear on your fundamentals as a group. Are you aiming for transition or innovation? Is your partner aiming for transition or innovation? Suggestion number 2, make strategic use of political dynamics, but guard your autonomy and focus. Suggestion number 3, a systemic approach can be vital for successful transition. Take helicopter view and create multi-stakeholder partnerships to create co-evolution to make transition possible. Suggestion number 4, mitigate risks of transition. So, for example, create a temporary backup scheme for risk takers so that the risks are not too high for them to transition towards the new system that you want to create, the new regime. Suggestion number 5, guard for your partner's attempt to redefine your concept to fit dominant regimes, which would be innovation, and be the first, be more concrete, and be at the strategy design table. All right, that's it. Thank you very much. Special thanks to Simona Rossi of Gen for ever organizing the possibility of presenting at Findhorn. If you are interested in the entire study and more information on the cases, you can find the thesis on this address and you can contact me through this email. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope it's useful. If you have any questions, contact me. Don't hesitate, and see you next time.